The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and a very warm welcome to the third of our Teaching for Neurodiversity Train the Trainer webinars. These webinars are funded by the Department for Education as part of a Dyslexia and SPLD support project. My name is Alison Keeley and I'm a Regional Manager with Dyslexia Action, one of the charities involved in delivering the Teaching for Neurodiversity project. We hope that you've already accessed parts 1 and 2 of the training, either by attending the webinars or by listening to the recordings. If you haven't already done so, the recordings are available on the Dyslexia Action website on our projects page. For everyone attending tonight's live event, you'll receive an email at the end of tonight's session giving a link to the recordings and all the relevant materials. Tonight's session is called Classroom Support Strategies. As with parts 1 and 2, materials you'll see in the webinar have been developed by a consortium of leading charities, including the British Dyslexia Association, Dyslexia Action, the Dyscalculia Foundation, Helen Arkell and Patos. And we have also had additional input from Steve Chin, Fintan O'Regan, ICANN, and also Ambitious About Autism. To support you while you are listening to the webinar, it's a good idea to have the PowerPoint to hand so that you can refer to it and make notes. The PowerPoint can be accessed in the handout section of the webinar. Just as during the previous webinars, we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. Remember, you can post a question at any time using the facility on your screen. We'll select the most representative questions to discuss at the end. If we don't get around to answering your query during the session, we'll try to include it in the list of questions we post on the Project Partners websites after the event. So, now I'm delighted to be able to introduce Catherine Wright of Dyslexia Action, who is going to deliver tonight's webinar for us.
Thank you, Alison, for that introduction. As Alison was saying, my name is Catherine Wright. I'm also working for Dyslexia Action. I'm a regional manager for the North and Central area. And I'm going to talk to you today. I want to do the third part of the classroom support strategies for secondary education. If I do need to be muted at any stage, just because I've got a little bit of a cold, and Alison will know when to mute me. So hopefully I will not need that. I'm going to go through all the different slides and then hopefully take questions at the end. What I wanted to explain initially is that there's probably nothing new here, but a lot of it is to remind you a lot about good practice and hopefully will give you some inspiration about how you can actually cascade this to the schools. What I'd like you to really think about initially is to just pick 2 or 3 ideas from this talk and give this to your teachers and your teaching assistants, etc. And just pick a few ideas, because it's impossible to actually do everything. And have a look at this as part of the assess, plan, do, review cycle. Within this, you need to look at that one-page profile, which hopefully you will actually have seen before. And within this profile, you look at the appreciation aspect of it, which is what is the learner good at, and then what is important for that learner and how to support that learner. So have a look at that within the cycle. And then ask yourself at the end of it, did this enable the learners to do better than they did before? And then look at it again. What else can we add in? Possibly, obviously, share these ideas with staff and through the learning walks. When you're looking at learning walks, it's kind of observation and free of judgment, collecting common trends around the school. So it's well worth looking at the learning walks. Also, if you have a look at the Special Needs Jungle website and how you can actually work with parents as partners, because that will really help the actual working together. Often what works for a person with dyslexia will work for the majority of individuals. And not all methods are going to work for everybody. Everyone's an individual in this situation. Right, sorry, I'm just trying to get my PowerPoint to work. There we are. Sorry about that. So initially I just want to look at the paragraph from the Code of Practice, which is the purpose of identification is to work out what action a school needs to take, not to fit a pupil into category. We're not in the, we don't need to diagnose somebody to support them, and we need to have a base of full understanding of the particular strengths and needs, and that's why you're looking at the checklist. Hopefully you've seen that checklist, and I've found that's one of the most important things coming from this project. And then seek to address all of the strengths as well as the needs with target intervention, if necessary with specialist equipment and software. So it's not about fitting somebody into a category, because often people don't fit into categories easily, especially when it comes to neurodiversity. So it's just always critical to try to make sure that somebody is actually having that support as quickly as possible, rather than waiting for further assessment, not waiting for another half a year until a psychologist comes in. And it's really important for the SENCO to be the liaison. The hardship when it comes to secondary school against primary school is that in primary school generally the students only have one teacher. When it comes to secondary school they could have 9 different teachers. And I think the difficulty for SENCO is having the communication across the board. When you're looking at the checklists, it's always worth getting that checklist done by each of them teachers, because you'll see different strengths and weaknesses for different learners across the board. So you might find that they're better at PE or woodwork or practical subjects, but actually not as good when it comes to English or possibly maths. So it's worth looking at across the board so you can actually see if there's any clash in personalities, or are the areas where you tend to find that they might play up in certain classes and not in others. And then you start to realise the reasons behind it, and it's not generally that they are playing up in every class, because a lot of the time that is actually not so much a behavioural issue but an avoidance tactics. And what we need to do is avoid a down spiral after come out of primary school, because often they'll come out of a very nurtured environment into an environment where they actually have to be a lot more individual and be able to take care of themselves. So often that can be a real crunch time for them. We have to also understand that we are not trying to make teachers into specialists. Sometimes it can be very hard for them and think, well, I'm not a specialist in this. We're giving them more what we'd call an IKEA catalogue. So we're giving them a catalogue of different things that they can try and work with. We're not there to make them specialists. And it's really important to look at them reasonable adjustments, and obviously very valuable when it comes to Ofsted. So it's important also just to have a look at that primary liaison so that we have as much information as possible coming out of the primary school. So one of our first slides here is discussing self-esteem. Like I said earlier, SEN learners or learners with specific learning difficulties are very vulnerable, and often it just takes one tiny thing to knock their self-esteem, and it's such a big jump from primary to secondary school, especially with somebody, for instance, that may be on the autistic spectrum. So it's such a big difference for them. So it's really important to look for their strengths and recognise them. And this could be different for different subjects. So it's understanding all of the different strengths and weaknesses they have, and give them praise where praise due. Sometimes the task got to be done in a private situation. It can actually be destructive sometimes, giving too much praise within a classroom situation. As a teacher, you often will know when the best time is for this. And also, just don't patronise. A student will know if you are overpraising them or praising them for work that isn't too good. So just be careful of that situation. And look at accumulation of positive outcomes. One of the things I really quite like is a couple of things on the iPad. One's called Book Creator and the other one's called Comic Maker. And what you can often do is when you're actually setting, for instance, a writing task, which could be within lots of different subjects, it's really good to give them an overview of what you'd like to achieve at the end of it. And both with the Book Creator and the Comic Maker, you actually can end up with a published piece of work. And they can personalise it, they can take pictures, they can add text into it, and they end up actually publishing it and actually doing their own voiceover for it. So it's wonderful to actually have something at the very end of it. But when it comes to talking to your learners with specific learning difficulties, often they need to see the big picture first. So if you can actually help them with mind mapping and then outline the stages that you're going to go through with a writing frame or bullet pointing, and then explain how far you're going to go and where it's going to end up. A few times I had students where they say, oh yeah, we're doing, you know, inspector calls, for instance. And I say, so what are you doing at the end? Are you going to have questions? Are you going to do an essay on it? And they don't know. And it's really good if you can actually say, this is what we're going to do at the end of it, so they can actually look at it and actually analyse it as they go along. And it's the same with any questions. If you can actually give them the question at the beginning, it means they're actively listening and actively reading. My next one is looking at understanding challenging behaviour. You'll often find, and we get this on a lot of occasions, you can have students that do have a lot of anger problems and have a lot of behavioural problems. Often this is tactics. They may not know they're doing it themselves, and other times they've actually developed these avoidance tactics because we're asking them to do something that's very difficult for them. One of the reasons we say is that often your dyslexic person will have the sharpest pencils, and this is because they have used every tactic to avoid putting pencil to paper. They'll sharpen everybody's pencils in primary school. I often find that you actually have what I call the mouse and the mouth, and try not to be sexist about it, but often the girls are the mouse. So they will sit at the back of the class, avoid eye contact, and you may not notice that they are struggling. They may be achieving okay, but not achieving as they should be. Maybe not actually engaging in class too much. And then sometimes the boys tend to be the mouth, as in they'll talk to their friends and do their best to see if they can get kicked out of the class. And of course this would start a downward spiral by doing this, because then they certainly won't know what's going on, and then it causes a problem. So it's worth looking, because this actually could be a red flag that there's some underlying difficulties. But if we actually look at the underlying issues, often this actually can be remedied by seeing what the issues are. So for instance, this could be as simple as if they actually had something like an iPad in class, they can take a picture of the instructions so it's right beside them, and they can actually start to work through it themselves. So have a little think about that when it comes to it. Other ways would be creating a positive environment. reducing any noise, and sorry my telephone went off earlier, and make sure the lighting's good. See if your students can be at the front of the class. One of the things I say here is do it subtly. I had a situation with my daughter, she never talks to me about this anymore, where I said to the teachers, look, put her to the front of the class. She really needs to have that attention so you can see if she's concentrating. And then the first thing the teacher said is, Hannah, come to the front of the class, and just did it in front of everybody. She was devastated, absolutely devastated, and then proceeded to tell me that I was never going to talk to her teachers ever again. Try to do things quite subtly so that people are not segregated from the class or pointed out from the crowd. So try to make sure that it's done confidentially, and that student actually can come and talk to you and talk about any difficulties they might be having. Especially with your learners with the autistic spectrum, it's really important to prepare them for what's likely to come up next. They don't like sudden changes. So try to make sure they actually have prompts about what's happening next. You know, when they're going on a school trip, what might happen. So try to give them that reminder so there's nothing a shock, otherwise that could be a problem for them. Sometimes some learners need some time out, so they can have like a red card system, which a lot of schools do, but it's important not to overuse that, because it can be something that a learner can click onto and it gets a bit overused. So there has to be some hard and fast rules about that. Motivation is really vital for our learners because self-esteem can be quite low, so motivation be quite low. So when you're looking at goals, try to make them simple and straightforward. As I said earlier, try to make sure that you give them the big picture so that they can see where they're going and look at set achievable targets. So differentiation is the key here, and sometimes it can be done really easily, other times it does take a little bit more preparation. Try to make sure, as we know, the SMART targets. If someone's got 10 spellings and you keep on getting 3 right, reduce the amount of spellings. You may not at secondary still look at spelling rules, but if you do, try to make sure the list is a list of specific spelling rules, not random spelling rules all over the place, because that's much harder to understand and to be able to learn. Try to actually make that really organised so that they can actually achieve it, as opposed to giving them 20 spellings and they only ever get 2 right. Obviously the same with other aspects of learning. So try to teach them the ownership of their own learning and give them some inputs into their own goals. One of the other things I actually do when it comes to spellings is, especially if it's like subject-specific spellings, they can also you can get some visual cues. Think of the mind's eye spelling. I don't know whether you've seen that before. And also help them to syllabalize it, break it down into its component parts. That actually might help to motivate them to understand how the spellings are, and obviously explain exactly what they mean as well. Right, teaching metacognition. It's a long word, but basically all it means is knowing how you know. How do you learn? Everyone learns differently, so it's really important to teach people how they learn. And this is something that often is something that is really important for secondary school more than primary, because often your primary learners aren't at the stage that they can actually take this on board. But it's recognised that it's one of the most important things. If you can give them ownership of their own learning, then you'll actually find that your job is half done. They can actually start to put in all of these different techniques for themselves. So teaching study skills. When I was thinking about this, I would probably teach in Year 7 and probably back then in Year 9. Year 7 relating to organisation skills, note-taking, things like that. And when they start to hit Year 9, how to revise. It's amazing how many students we see that do not know how to revise because nobody's ever told them how to do it. And they think that if they just read through something that it's going to go in. So it's worth saying to them, how did you learn how to ride a bike? It wasn't something that they just got on the bike and they could ride it immediately. They had to practice. So it's important to explain to them that everything you do needs practice in different ways. Some people would learn to ride a bike slightly differently to others. Some would need stabilizers, some wouldn't. So everyone learns slightly differently. So it's a case of you giving them the tools in which they learn and them picking the most appropriate tools of how they're going to do it. It's worth looking actually as well at NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which is a tool where you can actually look at their motivation and lots of other things so that they can see where they lie and how they can actually start to achieve a more rounded learning and understanding. So it's worth having a little look at that. Looking at the multisensory teaching, which we'll look at a little bit more in detail, different subjects will require different learning techniques. So for instance, maths would probably be more repetition, going over the papers, checking it, doing more sums. Whereas I found with one student, mnemonics was brilliant for geography. Or making a visual story in the head relating to that part of the subject, or actually thinking of a specific room and going around that room and thinking of all different areas that actually would then relate to that subject. It's amazing how you can actually work that. Have a think all in the different ways. There's a few more further reading there. Look at peer support and buddying up systems as well, if that might work. So have a think of all them different ways and think about the teaching of study skills early on. Okay, so having a look at positive language. So if you say to somebody, look out the window, or don't look out the window, they're going to do it. So if you can actually use really positive language with learners, so for instance, can I help you with this? Which bit do you like best? It would be even better if you. So one of the things we often do with handwriting, for instance, we'll actually get them to do some handwriting. Now I'll get the highlighting pen and say, highlight the things you find the best. And then from there onwards, aiming for that best bit of handwriting. And just avoid the word but, because everyone's waiting for it. So if you actually say, oh, that's good, but, straight away, the ending on, a negative. So try to avoid them words if you can, but keep things on a positive. There's always something positive to bring out for things. Right, so we're looking at multisensory techniques. Anyone that's done any training relating to dyslexia and specific learning difficulties, I'll have an idea what multisensory is. You're looking at all the different senses. One of the reasons we say is that if you actually work through all the senses, then you'll actually find that it'll help everyone, whether they're a visual learner, a kinesthetic learner, auditory learner. But you will find certain people are much stronger in different ways. You'd be amazed at how many dyslexic learners are actually really good at history, and it's because they can visualize what it's like. So sometimes if you've got a story, get them to close their eyes and actually visualize what it looks like, and then ask them questions afterwards about it. So it's amazing how that actually can help. So have a think about how you can bring all the senses. It's much harder in secondary school than it is in primary school. So it takes a lot harder work to actually bring everything in together. Might be easier in the science class, not as easy in the maths class. Saying that, within the maths, you can start on the concrete, not literally concrete, but using physical things to create a point to start off with before you go onto paper, before you go onto the mental side of things. You cannot jump straight to mental maths, especially somebody with a short-term working memory problem. So start at the concrete no matter what. Any new teaching technique, start on the concrete. It's worth looking at Waggle, what a good one looks like. And I'm dyslexic myself, but if somebody actually just gave me, this is what I'm after, I can see where I'm going. I can see the big picture from the start. So, you know, you don't have to give them it permanently, so the copy of it, because that's what people sometimes think they're going to do, but give them an idea of where they're going. If you can imagine the Great British Bake Off or MasterChef, and they get kind of a recipe, but they've got no visual cues, how hard is it for them to visualize what that cake or that recipe comes out at? It's really, really difficult. So it'd be much easier if they had actually a picture of it, so they know where they're going from. So have a real good think about how you can actually give that visual cue for them. So like I said, looking at the visualization, you could ask them to make a movie in their head and see, you know, how they actually can put everything together. And like I said before, using mind's eye. That's where you can actually hold up a spelling or something, and I think it's to the right-hand side or left, I always forget, and they actually read the spelling or the word, read it forwards, read it backwards, take it away and get them to do it again. And it's amazing how they actually can do a whole word, especially if it's a difficult word. But you can't do that for every word. But this is something they really need to learn how to spell. You can actually do it that way. If they can use their own voice as a memory aid, so if you are using the comic creator, etc., you can add your own voice into it, so that then they can listen back all of the time. There's so much techniques out there now to actually help you. I'm just checking that right. Yes, so you read and write gold. I find that absolutely brilliant. So I just miss the endings of everything. So if I actually listen through read and write gold, I can identify that I've got it wrong. And that helps me tremendously. And also, it's almost impossible to reread and proofread straight after, because you're reading what you think you've written, not what you actually have written. So if you use something like Read and Write Gold or text-to-speech software, then you can actually hear it for what it is as opposed to what you think it is. Otherwise, you really have to reread it the next day. It's worth giving them just that little bit extra time to get a homework in. Try to only give one instruction at a time. And when you actually do give that instruction, give it in order, as opposed to saying, go and get your PE kit, but first finish that question and then put your books away, because it's out of order and then they get really confused. So try to be clear, short instructions, and be prepared to repeat yourself. One of the techniques I often use is I'll say to the class, right, I'm going to do this, this and this, and then I will say to one student, whichever, and I'll say, what are you doing first? And another student, what are you doing next? So they don't know who I'm actually going to ask, and I don't pick out the dyslexic students or anyone with specific learning difficulties. They all have to listen. And then eventually they get the idea that I'm going to ask that every time. But they then have to repeat it back to me. So have a think about something like that. Right, making text reader-friendly. About 10 to 15% of people will actually suffer from visual stress. I actually find that 9 out of 10 of us actually will find that using paper that's not white is better. One of the examples I use is that the only thing natural that's pure white is snow. And when you go skiing, you put sunglasses on because you get snow blindness. And then we go around bleaching paper, and we're looking at it, and bright screens, sometimes nearly all day. And you wonder why we get eye strain. Most people will find a cream paper or a pastel colour paper will be better. It may not necessarily mean our readings any quicker, but it may stop us getting some headaches. So for all of you, try just changing that background for yourselves and for your students, and make it probably a yellowy cream colour, for instance, and see what a difference it makes for you. Because I think you'll find most of you it will actually be a bit better. So because the white is just too dazzling. I had one story where a lady actually, she decorated cakes for a living, and she wondered why she was getting migraines, and she found she actually did get a snow blindness because she was literally looking at white all day. So, and when this happens, when somebody actually has visual stress, you'll find they'll skip lines, they'll skip words, they'll miss out small high-frequency words, they'll make errors, they'll confuse words, and they'll get their B's and D's and confused letters missed out. You'll also find with your dyslexic learner that they'll start to read the beginning of the word and they'll guess the end. So especially when you get to secondary school, when you've got the longer words, but this can really change the meaning of a word. So it's important for people to read fully. Try to avoid block capitals because it is too blocky. You can't actually define the letters. And sometimes underlining italics. Try to go for your 12 to 14 font and make your page quite clear. Bold is good for emphasising. Don't fully justify. Have that left justification, not your fully justified words. 1.5 line spacing is brilliant, and that really helps. And avoid really dense blocks of print. I find newspapers are horrendous. All I see is rivers of white when it comes to newspapers. One of my favourite things as well is use the purple pen of progress, as my son told me. Don't use red pen. It's absolutely devastating for your learners. So, you know, as a school, try to adopt the purple pen of progress. Students love it. Where splattered red pen across somebody's work, it can be really devastating, especially when somebody spent an awful long time on that work. So have a little think about techniques like that. Okay. Allow time to think. So 3 seconds is about the rule. You'll find some students are very quick and hands are straight up. And the students that have a slower processing speed, they probably know the answer, but every time that other student puts their hand up very, very quickly, they get a little bit more devastated. So maybe if you say, right, nobody can put their hands up for 5 seconds, and then give them time to think about it, and then they're allowed to put their hands up. So it gives the time for the people with slightly slower processing speed to be able to actually think about it, and they're more likely to engage in the class. So just give them that little bit of time to have a good think about it. So like I said earlier, if you actually give them the learning point at the beginning of the lesson, they can actually start to think about it as you're going through it. So they actually know the answer and you'll get more engagement. Just a little point, don't talk to the students while you're asking them to write. So we think we keep on wanting to fill in gaps, but often they do need that kind of quiet time, that thinking time. So if you've given them something to do, don't distract them by talking all the way through it. Because we do have a habit of wanting to talk an awful lot, especially me. So, memory load. You need to think three different things here. You've got your short-term memory, your long-term memory, and your working memory. Generally, short-term memory, you can hold about 7 to 8 items. Some people are good, they can get up to kind of a telephone number, but your learner with specific learning difficulties, this could be dyspraxia, autism spectrum, dyscalculia, etc. Often you're looking at about 3 to 4 items before they fall off our shelves. So you need to actually reduce that memory load as best you can, and like I said, only giving so many instructions at a time. And you need to find different ways of getting that short-term memory into your long-term memory, and that's where your multisensory techniques come into it. Once it's in that long-term memory, then you're there, but it's getting it there. And it's one of them things, so for instance, I would hope that you probably know your mother's telephone number because you've done it that many times. But you might not know your doctor's telephone number. You read it, get it into your telephone, and off it goes. Because you don't, hopefully, need it that often. But you would need your mother's, of course. So repetition will help with that. But lots of different ways. I mean, how many different ways would you do to remember your telephone number? I break mine down. I chunk it out. Other people just repeat in the head. Some make it into a different tune or a code. Different people have very wild ways of remembering things. And then you've got your working memory. So that's being able to take in information, manipulate it, work with it, and then regurgitate it in some way. So one of the ways we do this, and you can use this with your teachers, and it's great fun, so have some fun with it, is first of all, have a PowerPoint, flash up on the screen a number of numbers, probably about 6 or 7, give them a few, well, less than 30 seconds to actually remember it, take it away, don't let them write it down straight away, and then get them to write it down. And then do the same, but not do it verbally, not visually. Give them the number, then say, you've got to write it backwards, and then ask them how they learnt it. And the next one, which is great fun, is get them to repeat a word over and over again, and don't let them stop repeating that word. It could be any word. And then flash up the actual numbers. And then get them to write it down. And what you're actually doing there is you're distracting them because they're having to repeat this word over and over again, and they don't have the opportunity to repeat it in their head. So that's great fun. And if anybody wants kind of a little bit more techniques on that, I've got a PowerPoint on it, and I can just zip it over to you. So you have some fun when you're actually teaching your teachers. Least we can do. And the other thing we're talking about obviously is continue looking at that study skills. So give them manageable sized tasks, only about 3 things to remember, and use your technology as much as you can. Get them to take photographs of their homework. So iPads, telephones, they're great. So instead of them madly rushing down and trying to actually write down their homework in the last 30 seconds of the class, get them to take a picture of it, or get them to take a video of an experiment, or of a technique in maths, for instance. One of the things we also say is that if, for instance, there's a maths worksheet and they seem to have got it in the class, but then they start to do it wrong at home and they do the whole worksheet wrong, you now have to undo it. So they have to take away that wrong before you can get it right again. So if they had, for instance, like some snapshots of the actual technique, then when they do it at home, they can look at that and actually get it correct. And then you don't have to undo it. Okay, keep your language simple. So often you might have somebody who has very good speaking skills, but they could have actually quite poor receptive language. With English as second language learners, they often actually could have strong communication, but they have weak academic language. So try to keep really simple sentences. explain the language as you go along. For your learners that are more on the autistic spectrum, don't use double meanings. So don't say pull your socks up. They'll think it's literal, and avoid any sarcasm. So be careful of the language sometimes when it comes to your different learners. And have a little Google Jim Cummins, which I did last night, and look at the different theories on communication there. And there's some really good links all the way through here. So if you get time, go through it and actually do some Googling on it, because there is some really, really good information. So encourage alternatives to handwriting. One of the things I often say is that if you've got a dyspraxic learner or somebody has appalling handwriting, which happens a lot, I actually don't start to bring in laptops until like year 7, year 8. I try to avoid it in primary school because you've still got the chance to actually do something with the handwriting. It's really difficult to alter a handwriting much after year 8, if not year 7. It's terrifically difficult. So if they actually get used to using laptops at that point, and possibly within your study skills program teaching touch typing, it's not a good thing them starting to type in year 11 and all of a sudden they have to get good at typing because handwriting is so bad. If you can actually get that in earlier, then you'll find that the rate of writing is much better. And of course they do have to learn how to do the writing without the spell checker. So that takes a little bit of preparation as well. There actually is also a read-write gold reader function. So that's used for exam access arrangements, which we'll touch on a little bit later. So avoid anyone having to do loads of notes from the board because they're not going to get them down correctly. And maybe give them some exercises, softball squeezing, to help their muscles. And like we said before, facing the board will help your learner as well. One of the other things that I often will actually do, if you can do this, is at the beginning of a piece of writing or at the beginning of class, ground your learner. I don't know whether you understand what grounding is, but get them to sit upright and have both feet on the floor and actually concentrate and calm themselves and imagine that there's actually roots coming through the feet and actually ground them to that floor so they're ready for the work. So it's just a technique that we sometimes use, especially for your flighty learners. So have a little try of that technique. Look at different pens and pencils as well. If you Google dyspraxia pens through Amazon, there's about 5 different types of pens that are really good for dyspraxic learners. So if you have a dyspraxic learner or somebody that has really bad handwriting, or their pen grip is appalling and you can't get them to change it, have a look at these pens. Talk to the parents, get them to buy the pens for them and to use them. Because they're absolutely amazing. You used to be only to be able to get them in America, and now you can get them here. And there's some really, really good pens out there. Right, just a little slide here. Obviously, with your dyspraxic learners, especially, there could be gross motor skills problem as well as your fine motor. So sometimes you just need to give them a little bit more time, for instance, when they're changing for PE, understand what they can and can't do. So hand-eye coordination could be really poor, but they could be actually really good at running, or repetitive sports like swimming. They often can be really good, but possibly getting them to jump over hurdles, that might not be too good for them. So see exactly what they are good at and don't expect them to do stuff that they're not good at. Spatial awareness is a problem. So see how that goes and be understanding. And don't put them in a situation that, you know, would embarrass them. When it comes to academic language development, it's important to break down them words and actually explain the academic language. Don't expect that they're going to understand it. We often do this from a very, very early time. I mean, one of our first lessons will be what is a syllable and why are you using vowels and what's a suffix and prefix. Because if you demystify it, there then becomes a greater understanding. I remember when somebody said metacognition to me, I was going, oh my goodness, what's that? And then when you look at it, you go, actually, that's quite easy, and you have a much better understanding. So if you do have more technical language, which you will have in a lot of subjects, just give them 1 or 2 new words a week and get them to understand what they are. If you have a look at the Read and Write Gold, there's actually a dictionary aspect to it, and you can actually put these words into their own personal dictionary. It actually then brings up the definition, and it actually has a notes column to it, and you can actually add notes to it yourself. And it actually adds a picture to it as well. So it's a wonderful multisensory technique. So they can visualize it, they can see it in the context of a sentence. So have a really good think about that because that works so well with every subject. And it doesn't have to be just for your learner with specific learning difficulties, it could be for anybody. So it's something that you can print out for all of your learners in that subject, especially when you're going through a specific topic. You know, it could be absolutely anything. Organisation's a problem, especially for your younger learners. So one of the teachers told us about our Year 7 tortoise. And hopefully you understand what I mean. Year 7s have a habit of bringing everything. And I'm sure the further years they get, it gets smaller and smaller, and I'm sure they only get down to a pen by the time to get to Year 11. But your Year 7 tortoise has this enormous bag because they are struggling with their organisation and they bring absolutely everything. So have a think about visual timetables, pictures, diagrams, photographs, and teach them colour coding. And what actually stationery is for, using file dividers. So it's all about that study skills again. So have a good think about teaching that, because we think that they understand and they don't necessarily understand it, and they just need that little bit of help. Use recording devices, you know, and you've got them on your telephones nowadays. You don't even have to buy any of them. So I'm sure 99% of your students have their telephone with them. Okay, have a look at assistive technology. We've kind of touched on this already a number of times. And there's some great stuff out there. I love my Read and Write Gold, but that's me because I'm a trainer on them. Dragon's really good, but it has to be personalised to one laptop. It's personalised for that person. It's not something you can put on the whole system. There's loads of different ways they can add alarms to things, reminders, diary apps that often just need to be taught how to do it, and prioritise what they're going to use, because you could give them all these things and they just don't know what to use first. If you want to look a bit more, have a look at the BET exhibition. There's bdatech.org, and also Dyslexia actually have a Tech Thursday. And that has lots of different technology related aspects to it. Law to Learn also has a lot of educational textbooks, so as an organisation it might be worth looking into that as well. Right, I've touched on proofreading already. So again, you need to look at teaching how to proofread. So looking at encouraging learners to take time out to read it in small chunks. Provide a digital copy if you can, so then they can actually listen through it and then highlight. And then demonstrate how they can take separate notes for the reading. Creating word lists, and again you could do that on your Read and Write Gold as well. look at teaching proofreading and get them to read out loud. They can read actually in reverse to check spellings, but never make them read out loud in class because that can be really difficult and quite devastating, as I know myself. When you actually have a student that actually, obviously you're coming up to exams, it's really, really important, and that's why I was saying about the year 9s, to actually teach the exam techniques. So often they just don't know how to revise. So look at rhyming and acronyms, using cards, colour coordinating things, using digital mind mapping or non-digital mind mapping, checking through papers and being active learners. Palimism is actually where you can actually also do memory techniques, a little bit like Kim's game, grouping activities together and sorting out ideas so they can make lists of things and actually plan their timetable. So demonstrating how to do this and actually teaching study skills is vitally important. If your learner has exam access arrangements, which is really important to actually do early on, because it has to be the normal way of working. So this really needs to be identified at year 8, year 9 at the latest. It's really important, as after they do exams running up, that they're using them access arrangements and they know how to use the extra time, how to use a reader. If you have a lot of people that actually have reads, look into the Read and Write Gold, because they actually have a specific one just for exams, which saves you a fortune on getting human beings to do it. And you know, it works really, really well. So don't just bounce an access arrangement on somebody. They need to practice with that. If they've got a scribe or a reader, a physical one, it should be the same person. And they need to have the confidence to say, read that again, do that, write this, slow down, speed up, etc. Because that takes a lot of confidence to do. Now with the access arrangements, the person that's actually doing these arrangements needs to have a level 7 and at least 100 hours relating to individual specialist assessment, or they need to be a psychologist or have APC, practice and certificate. If you need any more information on that, just contact us and we can help you with that. I'm just going to go through the last few because I've obviously talked too much. Have high expectations for your learners. Don't lower them expectations because a lot of them are very bright. Some people asked about modern foreign languages. With some learners it is important that actually they might find this terrifically difficult and it was worth taking out the curriculum. The next two slides, one is relating to Hannah. So that's looking back at your section 1 and 2. So have a little look at that with your staff. And the next one is relating to a student that you know about. Sorry, I'll just whip through that there. So then you can bring that together within your staff meeting. Hopefully you've seen part 1, 2 and 3 now. If anyone wants to come back to me and have a chat afterwards, please don't hesitate to. And your last bit really is to look at how you're going to deliver this and what you actually want to pick out and use as a school and work on. Getting your senior management team on board and looking at the whole school and what the current policies are and what you can actually help with. So it's important for this not to just be led by one person, but by the whole school approach. And try your best to empower them learners. Right, I realise that I am nearly on my time and I'm not giving much time for questions, but there's mine and Alison's email address, so please use it and we're happy to take any questions in the last few minutes we've got. Alison?
Hi, Kath. So I've had a question from Louise who said, please could you just repeat what you were saying about MFL and why you might want to take it out of the curriculum for learners with a specific learning difference?
Yeah, I galloped through that because I realised I was running out of time. Different schools have different policies. Some learners find learning a different language very confusing, and they struggle with English. So others find it absolutely fine. So if you do take a learner out of the modern foreign language lesson, the important thing is to replace it with something that's really valid. So if they have dyscalculia, more maths lessons or some very structured support. So you're not just taking them out one lesson to, you know, make them read in the library. So it can take the pressure off them, because if they feel pressurized that they have to learn another language, then you'll find the grades of other things will recede. So replacing it with something that is really valid for their difficulties is really good.
We've got a comment from Janet regarding that, who's saying that some modern foreign languages like German can be more accessible because they can, depending on the language, some languages are very clearly structured. So I think there's definitely a balance there, Kath. It will obviously depend on the learner, won't it?
Absolutely, and actually there is certain languages that are phonetically correct. I always say go for Spanish because it's nearly phonetically correct. So some learners are absolutely fine with languages, and other learners find it terrifically difficult. So it's all about doing that checklist and understanding the learner. It is not across the board taking them out the modern foreign languages. It's not across the board at all. It's understanding the learner and what's best for them.
That's lovely. There is a question from Sharon, which I think we'll save and answer offline because I think it's one that we need to look into. And that's it from us. So thank you very much for everyone who's attended this evening. We're getting some thank you comments back in on the question box, which is really lovely to see.
Thank you.
If you'd like to take both my and Kath's contact details for further follow-up questions which might occur to you after you leave the webinar, we are very happy for you to do that. We're more than happy for you to contact us. It's been a project we've been really, you know, happy to be involved with, and it's certainly brought us into contact with people from all over the world and right across the UK, so it's been really, really good. Thank you very much to all those people who've attended tonight, and we hope you found the series of webinars useful. We do have 3 final face-to-face trainings that are taking place in London in the coming weeks, one for primary, one for secondary, and one for post-16. The secondary one is on Saturday the 18th of February, free to attend. It's taking place at Imperial College, free lunch. So if you want to attend that, then if you go to the Dyslexia Action Projects page, you will see the link to the Eventbrite so that you can join. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening, and please contact us if you have any further questions. I say thank you to Kath as well for her fantastic.
Thank you everybody.
Lovely. Thanks very much.